Hey guys, this video is going to go through solving equations, and it's a quick review of some of the trickier types of equations that you're going to see this year. So please try these problems with me as you go and take notes in your notebook. All right, so if we take a look at our first problem, only tricky thing, we have the distributive property here, which you guys know how to do. The only tricky thing is this minus symbol in front of the 3 that you distribute. So let's go ahead and try this one. So the 7 just stays the same out here. Okay, you're going to distribute, this is kind of like a -3. You're going to distribute that to the entire parentheses. So -3 times 2x is minus 6x. And then I'm going to do -3 times a positive 4, which is -12. All right, on the other side, I just keep my 2, okay? And then here, in the second part, it says minus, and then it's got this parenthesis. So it's basically minus everything inside here, or you can think of this as there being a 1 here and distributing a -1. So if I do -1 times x, that's -x, and then a -1 or -4, which turns into -4. All right, now we just have a normal equation that we should know how to solve. We know how to combine like terms and solve it from there. So if we take a look at the first side, I'm just going to rewrite it, combine my like terms. I have 7 and -12, which gives me -5, and then I still have minus 6x equals, on the other side, I'll combine my 2 and my -4, which is -2, and then I still have minus x. All right, next step. I usually like to move the x's first, and I like to move the smaller one. So let's cancel out a -6x. I will add 6x to both sides. Okay, this side cancels, so I'm left, or make zeros out, so I'm left with -5 equals -2. -x plus 6x is 5x. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and add 2 here to cancel out the -2. So I'll add 2. I end up with -3 equals 5x. I just have one more step. I will divide by 5. Okay, so on this side, 5 divided by 5 is just 1x, so I end up with x equals -3/5. If you look at that fraction, it looks like it's simplified already, so I can just leave it like that. All right, let's take a look at this problem. We're not going to solve it all the way, but I want you to go ahead and rewrite it using the distributive property, and then we'll just check the first step. So push pause and try that out. All right, now that you've had a chance to try it, so again, the 2x just stays. And then this -2 right here, I need to distribute that to the entire parentheses. So -2 times 3x is -6x, or minus 6x. And then here's where you have to be careful. It's -2 times -4. Well, negative times a negative is a +8. Okay, on the other side, the 7 is just going to stay. And then it's minus this entire parentheses. So you can think of it as the opposite of the entire parentheses, or you can think of a little -1 here. So if I do the opposite of x, it's -x, or subtract x, and then the opposite of 4 is -4. All right, and then I could go ahead and solve it from there by combining like terms. All right, the next type of equations that might be a little tricky are equations with fractions. So if you remember from last year, it's much easier if we can use fraction busting to get rid of the fractions. The reason is because 2/3, especially in one like this, 2/3, that is not a nice decimal if you were going to try to change these all to decimals. That's 0.6 repeating. So it's easier if we can just try to cancel out the fractions. So in order to do that, remember you can look at the denominators of the fraction and find the least common denominator for those, or least common multiples. So if I look at 3 and 2, I know the first number they both go into is 6. So I'm going to times the entire thing by 6. So we're going to times every single part of this equation by 6. So sometimes we would put a 6 outside of there. So remember, we're going to times this by 6, this by 6, this part by 6, and this part. All right, so if I do the first part times 6, remember that's the same as 6/1 if I'm multiplying fractions. So 6 times 2 is 12, and then 1 times 3 here is 3, and then I still have my x, plus a lot of times kids forget to times this by 6 as well, my normal number here. So 6 times 5 is 30. So I'm going to change that to 30 equals, I need to do 4x times 6, which gives me 24x. And then here I'm going to times this by 6, or 6/1. So it's minus, I end up with 6/2. Okay, so now you might think, well, we still have fractions here. Well, the nice thing is now we can divide these out. So 12 divided by 3 happens to be 4x. All right, then I still have plus 30 equals, here I have 24x. And then minus 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay, from there I should be able to solve it. pretty easily. Okay, if we take a look at some other problems with fractions, I want you to think about, well, what would you multiply these fractions by to cancel out the denominators or to get rid of the fractions using fraction busting? So go ahead and look at both of them and see what do you think we should multiply by here? All right, the first one, if I look at all the denominators, I have 5x, I have x, and I have 10. So if you just look at the number part here, the coefficient, 5 and 10, I know that the smallest number they both go into is 10, so I'm going to have to times everything by 10 for sure. And then you might notice you have x and x, well, they both go into x. So I'm going to multiply everything by 10x, or 10x over 1. Okay, in the second one, same thing, I'm going to look at the denominators. All right, and I'll look at the coefficients first. I see 6 and 2. Well, both of those will go into 6, so I'm going to for sure multiply by 6. And then I also have these x's again, so I need to multiply by x, 6x. Now, I'll just show you really quick what will happen on this first one. If I multiply by 6x over 1, well, 6x times 4 is 24x. And then 1 times x down here is just x. And now, the nice thing is I can divide this out. X divided by x is 1, so I'm just left with 24. Okay, again, I would do the same thing here. I would do times 6x over 1. Same thing here, times 6x over 1. And then it would end up being a nice, simple equation that you can solve from there. All right, I have another one that looks like the one we just did. So if you take a look at this, I see 1 fraction, 2/3. So I want to kind of get this to cancel. Now, if I want to cancel 2/3, the only denominator I see is this 3. So I am going to multiply this entire problem by 3. Okay, now if I do that, again, this right here, this is all kind of one term. So I'm just going to multiply. You're going to end up multiplying the 3 times this. And then once you get whatever that is, then you can actually distribute here. So if I do 3, or 3 over 1 times 2/3, I end up with 6 over 3, which you guys know is 2. And then times, I still have the 6x plus 7. And then equals, over here, I'm still going to multiply this part by 3 right outside here. And then I can do my distributing. So I have negative 12. Now I can times that by x plus 5. All right, from here you guys should be able to solve. You guys know how to distribute. The only thing I would just suggest doing is changing this 6 divided by 3. That ends up being 2. So now I have 2 times 6x plus 7 equals same thing on the other side. All right, now you could do this problem one other way. You could actually distribute first. So I could multiply this out, just keep the fraction. So if I do 2/3 times 6, well, 2/3 times 6 ends up being 4x, plus if I do 2/3 times 7, that ends up being 14/3. Okay, and then equals on the other side, I'll distribute, I get negative 4x and minus 20. Okay, so now when I get this far, I still am trying to get rid of this fraction. So I still have a denominator of 3, so I'm still going to have to multiply this entire thing by 3. So again, now I would times this by 3, the 4x by 3, I would times this by 3, I would times this back by 3, and this back term by 3. Then I would solve from there, and I would end up with the same answer. All right, the last type of equations that sometimes mix people up are equations with decimals. So if you want to try to get rid of the decimals in an equation, there's a quick, easy way to do it. So to try to change, this would be a lot easier if this was a whole number. Same thing back here. So let's just think about it. If I want to change this to a whole number, basically the decimal needs to move over twice. Well, moving over once, that's the same as multiplying by 10. So moving over twice, that would be multiplying by 100. If I did that here, if I move it over twice, that's still okay. It cancels the decimal. So I'm actually going to multiply this entire equation here by 100. Now, when I do that, the only thing you have to be careful about is this term right here, because this is all together. So really, I'm just going to multiply 100 times 0.25, which ends up being 25. Then I can do 25 times 10 and 25 times negative 8x. Again, you still need to multiply this by 100 and then multiply that by 100. That'll get rid of my decimals, and I'll solve from there. So if I look at the bottom one, okay, I see a couple decimals. I see one here, 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 a lot of decimals. So to get those all to be whole numbers, it looks like each of them only has one decimal spot. So I'm going to multiply by, I only want it to move over once, 10. So if I multiply each of those by 10, this would move over 1, I'd get 3x. This would move over 1. If I times that by 10, I get minus 72 equals, this would move over one place, I get 14x, and plus, if I multiply this by 10, I get 35. Now it's just a normal equation, and I can solve it from there. So if you have any questions on any of these types of equations, please check in with one of your teachers.